Hi, everyone, and welcome to our first ever North American broadcast of Holzer Time. My name is Lawrence Lamb. I'm the Global BIM script trainer over at BIMobject, and our presenter today is going to be Steve Holzer. We're going to be talking about the currency of the built environment, which is digital content. So before we get into that, I'd like to just go over some housekeeping items here. Steve, can you move to the next slide? So you're going to see in your webinar, there's going to be an area where you can ask any kind of questions that you have during the webinar. So I'll be monitoring the questions and presenting your questions to Steve during random times in the webinar. So feel free, if you have something that's on your mind, type your question into the window and we'll get to them. And if we don't get to your questions today during the webinar, someone will respond to your questions offline through email. We also have a poll that we're going to be showing you in a few minutes. If you can take a few moments and fill that in, that would be great. And finally, the whole webinar is going to be recorded. So those of you who are on the webinar right now, you should receive an email 2 days after the session with a recording of today's webinar so that you can watch it again in the future. And for future webinars, if you register and are not able to attend, you will still receive the same follow-up email 2 days later with the recording. So if you registered and can't make it, don't worry about it. You'll still get a recording for that. So right now, what I'm going to do is just fire up the poll. And if you guys can take a few moments and start, just answer the poll, and we'll give that a few minutes. So it looks like we have quite a few architects and designers on this webinar, which is awesome. Got a few building product manufacturers, which is great. Construction and trade assembly people, and facility owner. Awesome. This is fantastic. It's a good rounded turnout today.
That's great. Thanks, Lawrence. Thanks for getting this kicked off.
No problem. So give me another like 10 seconds and just to finish off the poll, and then we can share the response.
Yeah, thanks everybody for filling this out. It really helps us address our audience. So and it's great to see the mix, like Lawrence said.
So we got about 78% closing, and you can see some of the results here. So again, we got quite a few architects and designers, and got a good number of construction and trade assembly people, facility owners, and BPM. So this is awesome. So thank you for joining. All right.
Fantastic.
All right, Steve, take it away.
So when I was putting this webinar together, the challenge to the digital content as currency of the full building life cycle is the full building life cycle has a lot of stops, a lot of pieces, and a lot of parts. So today's talk is really strictly an overview. I had to whittle it back. I had to cut it down, and part of the intention is that I would like to hear some feedback from you folks, through the chat or through the questions, or even in the survey after the end, on particular points maybe are unclear, or maybe you have a different perspective than what I'm going to share with you, because this is meant to be, a dynamic discussion, not just a one-sided. Even though it's with hundreds of people on, it's hard to continually, stop and so forth. Though Lawrence will be interrupting me when there's something that one of you guys pops in, or gals pops into the question box that's relevant, and he feels like it's going to be something that everybody would like to hear. But we also want to hear, maybe what you think. Nobody else is worried about this. Just drop it in. We'll answer it. We'll get back to you on that. So, but digital product content is really the only continuum through the full building life cycle. It's something that is there from day one, and in a full building life cycle, in some verticals in terms of vertical markets, let's say, not vertical facilities, but in some verticals, retail, for instance, it may only have a 3 or 5 year lifespan. But then you get into universities and other institutions, it may have a 100 year lifespan. So these are all being grappled with and dealt with, and you'll see later on where we're actually engaging all aspects or all facets of the industry across this, as well as even other kind of unbefore considered parts of the industry. I'm going to go back to the beginning. What is BIM? Because to this day, you know, BIM's been around a long time, and Lawrence actually used this last week in one of his webinars, and it was really telling. So it talks about the visualization or the objects. I mean, it's really cool. We got a brick wall, we got drywall on the inside, we have a window, and those are all really neat. You can see them and the visualization, but that's just a first level of BIM is the visualization. BIM is building information modeling. So the real proof or the real content is in such as classifications and properties, the data. The data is what is absolutely critical. And the data as it applies to every single building product within that full facility. We need the data and earlier rather than later. It's not just for facility management anymore. It's for design and many other things as well. So BIM has given us kind of a new built world order, and there's all different levels or degrees of implementation of BIM. We're still struggling in the industry with other folks, or a lot of folks viewing BIM as a piece of software. And in all honesty, as we'll see in a little bit, you know, BIM is really about the information. That's the key. So with the new built world order, it's always been that, as this Lego depiction shows us, when it came to the assembly phase or the field or construction, it had to fit together. It could no longer be a design intent. It had to go together. It had to work. It had to function together and interact with other pieces and parts of adjacent systems. So they always had to make it work. And to that degree, I think that's a lot of why we're seeing the VDC, the virtual design and construction, and owners' representations pulling together collaborative teams early in, even just outside of the requirements phase of a new facility, because that allows all these pieces and parts to kind of be chosen and work together as a complete system, not just an HVAC system, not just a fire protection system, but a building, a functional restaurant or hotel or dorm room. So the adoption of BIM as we know it was largely driven by a lot of the VDCs and the construction folks, because they were having to make it work together in the field, regardless of what they received out of the design and engineering development. So back as I suggested earlier, I grabbed a graphic and we're just going to go around the circle. This is a real high level 10,000 foot view, macro view of what's going on. And one of the things in the world of changing an industry, which is really what we're doing, we're all participating in the change of this complete industry, is a lot of people say semantics, Steve, that's semantics, by using different words. So I'm going to share with you some of the words that we see globally that are used in different phases and the reasons. And also, I think it's extremely important that we do not continue. One of the challenges, we talk about drawings when we might mean a view of a model. That really muddies the communication. You know, a drawing is something that has to be interpreted. It's a 2D, and it's always open to error, just because as an interpretation, everybody has an opinion. I did a webinar a while back, you guys may have been on it, about communication as the foundation of this industry. You know, when it comes to digital content, it's ones and zeros, it's black or white, it's yes or no. It's not, I think this is what is going on. So not only visually in 3D, but it's backed up with the data and the performance data as well. So in the planning stage, what we're seeing that is needing and consuming the digital contents of building products is even artificial intelligence. And actually, this may be coming even from in the renovation. The artificial intelligence is being used to in many ways to manage systems, to identify systems, to even in the whole sequencing and the planning of the facility. generative design. We've heard a lot about this lately. Generative design, I submit to me, it is kind of a form of artificial intelligence, though it is really focused more on, I'll call it the space planning layer. And there's other versions that go a little further into the process, but organically speaking, it's typically has to do in the early design phases. Virtualization is another huge one. I was at USC for their BIMBOP last week with another colleague here, and we saw a number of large use cases, one being the current Las Vegas Raiders Stadium, another one being the Los Angeles Rams and Chargers Stadium, another one the Lucas Museum. These are just fantastic structures that never could have been really constructed without using digital content. And the virtualization was used, I believe it was on the Lucas Museum. They actually, for the board to approve the design of that facility, they actually brought in 6 virtual reality stations and had the board immersed in experience that new facility to sign off on it as it go forward. So not only are we seeing virtualization, you know, in those levels, it's usually done in mostly for now in the planning stages, it's done what I call surface out. So a lot of the finishes, a lot of the interiors, things like that, even furnishings. Systems engineering is another huge one. We get calls. I've gotten a number of them here as the evangelist for BIMobject, global evangelist, all over the world of engineering platforms, cloud-based computational fluid dynamics platforms, other types of virtualization platforms, looking for specific manufacturer content because they no longer want their engineers to have to pull down a PDF spec sheet or a cut sheet on a submittal to plug in values of the coefficient of airflow or an STC or anything. That's just not viable in today's world. Cost definition. This is a Holzerism here that I, when I was part of developing the U.S. National BIM standard, I proposed, but I was too late to get this in, that we went through the standard and do a word search and replace estimating with cost definition, because with digital content, there is no more estimating. Estimating only belongs in a real early feasibility analysis. But beyond that, we have content. We have a digital facility that we can actually extract and query for a 32-story office building, how many drywall screws are necessary to complete that facility. So cost definition is another big place that's happening. And that flows right into procurement and tendering. A lot of this is being done direct, real time, right out of a data store or a data lake, whatever you want to call it. As you see in the center here, it's being called a number of things. A common data environment is one. A central information database was actually, I think, what the HNTB used for the Las Vegas Raiders Stadium. Different firms, it seems, are using different nomenclatures for it, but essentially it's a collection, and it's a model and all the embellishments that go along with that to create a complete facility. Something else that's happening that's really changed it from back to when I said vertical, the other use of vertical is vertical in terms of building. You know, in the past, we've looked at a lot of digitalization, primarily engaging the built environment, meaning buildings and facilities. With IFC 5, the newest upcoming ISO standard is not out yet. IFC 5 actually includes horizontal. It includes the infrastructure, the roads, the sewers, the transportation systems, water, life safety. And you've probably heard the terms of digital cities and smart cities. That they're wanting to get that early stage model that understands the loading of that facility in terms of people and requirements for utilities, and set it in their smart city structure. A couple of years ago, even Austin, Texas, I was involved in a project down there where they were wanting to be able just to look at how do they plug in a model into their cityscape or their smart city system to understand how it's going to impact transportation. On to assembly, and again, I'm using a word here that captures a little nuance that's different. Often it was called construction, and a lot of us know it as construction, but in today's environment, construction doesn't really do justice to what all is happening. In many cases, there's offsite construction, there's digital fabrication, there's a lot of other methods that I think there's a number of them that we're going to see that we don't even have on the forefront yet that are going to come out and explode in this industry that are really going to change how we create built environment facilities or even renovate them. So I'm using the term assembly. It's used a lot of places for this, but that includes a lot of different aspects. One of them is site logistics. How are they going to assemble this on the site? If it is being brought in as prefabricated components, what's the logistics? What's the sequencing? Material sequencing and handling. I've actually had conversations with folks calling in, Steve, hey, can you get one of the tower crane manufacturers? Can you get some of the material elevator folks? We want their real devices able to be put into the model so that we can run studies on sequencing, 4D time. How do we plan on a real tight new facility going up in an urban environment? They're actually planning down, in some cases, to the 15-minute increment when another truckload of material that's going to arrive, and the crane's scheduled out to move that in the most expeditious manner. So we're not tripping over material that's not going to be needed for a few hours even, much less a few days or weeks, which has been the past. I mentioned before offsite manufacturing. This can take a lot of different forms and formats. Modularization, even system assemblies coming in that are somewhat modularized, even in fitting it within the superstructure. Another thing that's available with digital content is even for mechanics on site, whether it be mechanical trades, structural, curtain wall system installers, any kind of installers. Installation info is readily available. It's online available. They're all walking around with smartphones and iPads now. That's their reference point. That's something that they can immediately find, even by wayfinding, where they are in the building, and it contextually can have an idea of the equipment or what their role is and what they need to know to complete the installation. Robotics data. So we need data to feed the robotics. Again, a lot of the robotics are being driven by the digital content that's the products that are being installed. It has a lot of smart capabilities and understands, and even in sequencing from a robotic perspective, whether it's off-site or on-site. Another big one that I've only seen, and I think it's going to be a huge factor as we go down the road, is location and product compliance with design. I didn't know how else to word it because I didn't want to confuse it with anything that's currently being done, but the concept here is that if we have an electrical fixture installer on site, he's logged into his system with his smartphone, he simply could scan that fixture, a barcode on that fixture as it's placed. He knows where it's placing it. It knows it geospatially, and it will check to make sure that that is in compliance with what was defined in the design, and among other things. But during the assembly process, who installed it, when it was installed, and associated information. Cross-discipline coordination. This is another huge one. The various trades sequencing. This kind of ties in with the sequencing. What order are the various mechanical systems going in? Because certain ones have to supersede others, or it may be much more favorable from an installation perspective to hang all the air duct prior to the fire sprinkler going in. I know some of this is figured out manually now, but a lot of this, even segments, there's different segments of systems being put in with other ones being put in later because they're able to coordinate this installation across multiple disciplines. So we've got our building pretty much completed. It's ready for turnover or commissioning or startup. Again, the digital content is all there because we started bringing it in. The building products were brought in as Legos back from planning, and they might have been embellished through, especially in government jobs. A lot of times we're needing to use what we call requirement projects, which essentially have the performance data of a specific flush valve, but it may not have a brand. Eventually, it does have a brand as it's tendered and brought in, and that model, that data store, the common data environment is embellished with that brand, And now at turnover, we have all of the information already contained within that particular facility. It is already part of the data environment. Back to our it's a compliance audit for what was installed, what equipment was installed, what fixtures were installed. In the case of Kobe, which, you know, that's globally utilized at turnover for asset management, that by virtue of the fact that it was, as it was installed, it was actually inventoried as it's being installed, as opposed to having to come in later on and inventory it separately, which also populates the facility management systems data. The facility management systems data is a massive undertaking, a project that I've been involved with for a while, the new ANSI standard for total cost ownership, TCO, that's being developed by the APPA. They estimated that at minimum, they end up investing 5% of whatever a building costs. If a building costs them $10 million to build, 5% of that is going to be spent immediately at commissioning to start up the facility management systems, when they know full well that the vast majority of what they're buying was already defined and built into a digital model. Not unlike facility management, the asset management systems data is all there. Again, as furnishings and so forth are brought in, these become part of that complete, you know, that turnover when this building becomes brought online and equipment is up and running. System startup data is the next one. All of the information of what started up and you know, any kind of error codes that come up because of equipment that maybe wasn't operating within range, within specified range. This is all readily available through that, which also, and this is an area that we haven't seen a lot yet actually implemented, but all of this data at commissioning for all this equipment is an amazing foundation, and discussions I've had with a lot of facility owners for IoT monitoring, you know, pressure differentials in an HVAC system to understand when to replace the filter versus, you know, kind of monotonously changing it out every 30 days or 3 months, whatever it's called for.
Hey Steve, just don't mean to interrupt,
Sir.
but for those who don't know what IoT is, can you elaborate what IoT actually stands for?
Thank you, Lawrence. Thank you. Internet of Things. It provides information out of largely sensors. It can be anything. There are sensors being used in curing concrete even to make sure it achieves its maximum strength. There's sensors used in sound sensors for motor bearings and or heat sensors for motor bearings, that when they're out of a range, it notifies a maintenance man of an impending failure. We're seeing even down in a residential application, HVAC systems in the unit, the HVAC air handler, as I mentioned about the air filter, they may have a sensor for the pressure on both sides, on the intake and the output side of a given airflow unit, and it will alert them when that pressure differential is enough that indicates that the filter needs to be either cleaned or replaced, or something done with it, you know, some maintenance. So thanks, Lawrence.
As an easy example that everybody else can relate to, if you just think about your thermostat, so if you have an iPhone and a Nest thermostat, your Nest thermostat is considered a part of the Internet of Things, right? So anything that connects you with the devices or with, you know, appliances or anything like that within your home or in a building, those are all considered Internet of Things.
Great
Sorry,
example.
Steve, go ahead.
No, that's fabulous. No, thanks for clarifying that. That's a good example. This is why we pay Lawrence the big money to keep me in line. So operations and maintenance. This applies other places, but material safety data. It can happen even during the assembly phase, and it's usually gathered at commissioning. But you know, what's somebody getting into when they're going in to run maintenance, or there's been a failure, or any of those kinds of things. That's readily available in an environment like this, again, by wayfinding in the building on a technician's device. They are able to query, you know, any piece of equipment, any surface even, and see what is involved with that. As well, in that we've already talked about a little bit about IoT and getting signals, but even if not, replacement parts. Those are because of the fact that we have the digital product content within this now common data environment. Again, the technician was called to for an out of range condition on a specific piece of equipment. He's able to query right then and there to see if they have the replacement parts and what they need to do to repair it, as well as consumable parts inventory management. In other words, do they have it in inventory if it's something that's ongoing? Back to the disposable furnace filter, which aren't used that often in commercial these days, but there's a lot of consumable parts that many facility managers in larger campuses and so forth and buildings, even small retail in a mall, they often will have light bulbs. That's a great one. Less and less now with LEDs, but these are all factors that they have to manage, and they're able to do it with digital product content. Life safety wayfinding. This is another one that we're seeing kind of ties in with the smart cities. One of the reasons that they're asking for these digital models, even tied in with the fire sensing systems. They want to be able to direct a fire crew to a specific area in a specific building if there is an emergency situation, and then they have that material. That they know what material is in there, what kind of hazards they may be walking into. Not only that, finding their way through it. As well, it could be something as innocuous as a large hospital campus is challenging for a lot of patients to navigate, and those are all available as apps in some cases now with some of the indoor sensors we have and able to monitor and manage their way through. IoT sensors and utilization monitoring, we've talked about that. That's again in operations and maintenance. It's optimizing the life of that particular piece of equipment or that particular system often, instead of having just a scheduled maintenance that is kind of an average rule of thumb on something as simple as changing an air filter if that's needed. These make big differences when you're a serial owner that has 200 hotels of 2,000 rooms spread all over the globe. There's a large amount of potential waste that's happening either in replacing filters too soon or replacing filters too late, meaning they've paid an excessive amount in energy costs that they didn't really need to spend. Which brings us to the total cost of ownership. This is becoming a science, and with this, as I mentioned, part of the ANSI standard, and I will be having some talks on this as it comes out. Our phase 2 of the standard is set to be released the first quarter of 2020, so that's just 6 months out or so. Facility managers are of these. In this case, it's every university in North America is participating to a large degree. They're not only looking at the first-time cost, the install cost, they're looking at the utility bills. They're looking at the opportunity loss. They're looking at the downtime. They're looking at every facet of it. There's a pretty specific formula that is used, and right now everyone has their own. So the standard should normalize it and allow smart choices to be made between brands of a generator or certain factors and equipment of a backup generator for a football stadium or a hospital. So watch that. That's going to become very important on the data of digital products. The content. They're really looking at this heavy. So let's move to in the continuous circle anyway. Renovation, remodel, reuse. Often we've been hearing about the digital twin as existing conditions. One of the ways to harvest the value of that digital twin that was used, it was actually created through the other processes and used in operation and maintenance is no longer to harvest existing conditions at a renovation. Are you going to have to go out in the field and do field measurements or even a scan? Now, obviously for existing facilities, that's what's happening. That's how they're being brought into digitalization. They're being scanned in a number of different ways. So that's what I call, a bridge technology. It's bringing existing stock that was built pre-digital anything. How do we get those? Because sure, we build a lot of new buildings every year, and that's great that they're all digitalized. But wait a minute, what about the other X percentage, which is by far the vast percentage of buildings that are out there already standing that were built with literal paper drawings and literal paper maintenance books. So redesign being done in AR. One place that is really big is in tenant finishes, whether it be a mall that is having retail stores or an office building. You know, they're able to use that existing model. They may, in some cases, depending on what they're doing, strip it out and take it back to a white box to run it out again. They're able to walk a prospective tenant through with a minimal effort and let them see in an augmented reality situation in their existing facility what their offices are going to look like. What's the view out that conference room window? How does it look down that hallway? How do the people interact in the space? I jumped the gun a little bit here. Equipment replacement data. So even in a renovation, they might be doing an update of lab equipment in a laboratory of some sort, or even an update and a renovation for a higher energy efficiency of HVAC systems or other equipment. The data of what you're going to be removing is all readily available to you in that case. Again, back to the hazardous materials. This is a very big cost. A lot of us don't really see day in and day out, but not having that information and being able to mitigate the challenges of certain hazardous materials is a very big risk factor. So mitigating risk becomes a big part of even the digital environment, the digital content, because people can readily understand and access what the inherent risks are. I mentioned this a minute ago about a digital interior refit or white box. This is able to happen nearly on the fly in a real simple situation, but certainly it gives a prospective tenant in any situation, or even back to our board of directors members on a redesign of an existing shell that they're reusing. They can experience that and understand what it's going to be before it's done.
Hey,
So,
Steve, didn't
yes,
want to
sir.
cut you off, but we have some
Please
people
do.
who are wondering, what is AR? Like, you talk about it, but you don't really define it. So can you help define AR for us, please?
I will. AR, augmented reality, and not to be confused with virtual reality. The difference between augmented reality and virtual reality. One easy way in the built environment that I help people understand it is VR is used when nothing is existing. AR is used when you're in an existing facility. So maintenance techs often can use AR to, quote, if you will, have X-ray vision, see in the walls where the pipes are, where the electrical lines are. So augmented reality means that you do see the environment you're walking around in with a set of glasses, like wearing sunglasses. There's all different form factors and devices. And on those, there's a scene imposed of future, what's going to be done. We've even seen that used in the construction phase for like metal stud framing, where mechanics, trade contractors are actually using these devices, though the form factor I wouldn't suggest is optimum yet. They are able to do that, completely frame complete fit outs without using really a tape measure and chalk lines to lay it out, because it's all imposed in the space. So virtual reality, if you've never been in it, it's one of the few things you can do that'll instantly change your life, because I could speak to it. You could look at renderings for days, and it'll never be the same as it will be when you put on a virtual reality immersed device, because it actually immerses you in an environment. So when you're immersed in that environment, you're able to look up and underneath. You know, I could look underneath my desk and actually see what the underneath side of my desk looks like in that virtual environment, even though it didn't exist. So those are used usually when a facility hasn't been built yet. Thanks for getting me to clarify that, Lawrence.
Hey, no problem.
Another one that a lot of folks don't consider: deconstruction, demolition. There's a lot of places all over the globe that are now requiring, there is no such thing as a pure demolition permit like there used to be. There's actually needs to be reclaimable materials. They got to be inventoried. And decommission the actual equipment. Again, we need this digital content to decommission the equipment and manage that process. Asset disposal that we're in that facility. How's that all managed? Identifying, again, hazardous waste. I mean, I can't tell you where the risk mitigation folks are really looking now and understanding that if in an environment of digital product content, that this is all readily available, and it's a great time savings, cost savings, not to mention life safety savings. Even demolition sequencing. We talked about construction and assembly sequencing. In what order? How are they going to deconstruct that facility? Near our headquarters in Malmo, Sweden, I was over there a few months ago, and it took them a few months, but they actually, there was a 3-story office building that ran almost the whole block. And I couldn't figure out if they were renovating it or what for a while, but they truly were removing the brick. They removed the windows. They removed all the pieces and parts. Then they actually disassembled the structural steel. And it was either recycled or reused. One of our customers at BIMobject, Zella, a very large wallboard and concrete CMU product manufacturer, they even have a process where they're reclaiming their own products in a renovation. And I just read an article on this on LinkedIn the other day. They have what they call big bags that their material goes in, it comes back to their plant and gets reconstituted for reutilization in other products. Okay, Steve, that's all really cool. But how are we going to get there? I don't have a full roadmap of how we're going to get there, but I can tell you what some of the current impediments are that I think we're going to see need to fall, because they're based in how we've always done things. Let's face it, even today, what's not digital is the same way things have been done for 100 years in this industry. And that's never survived that long in any other industry, and it's not going to survive much longer in the built environment. Technology is able to be harnessed and leveraged in ways that we haven't even imagined. One of the things that I see as a current impediment is a design intent. Design intent is left over from the days of drawings. And that is a monstrous liability and catchphrase that everybody hedges their bets on and works to cover themselves on what is design intent. And there's a lot of head scratching. That's one of the reasons I probably don't have hair, among others. But you know, what is the design intent? That to me is always said, you need to read someone's mind, and that doesn't really happen. And there's always a lot of debate whenever it comes up. Well, what was the design intent? So the current models of liability, contractual liability, I hear people say, well, Steve, you don't understand, this can't happen because, you know, the contracts we're under. I understand that today, in some cases, in most cases, that is the case. But I submit to you, there are going to be ways that those are going to be abolished. There's going to be, because the industry, we have so much that we need to do, and we're spending so much extra money a lot of times in machinations that aren't producing any value. And as has happened in the bookstore business, you know, that's gone away. Paper-based thinking, back to semantics. We're now reaching a point where most middle managers have never lived without the internet. So by default, a PDF is not, you know, a document is not something that they're looking for. They want to query either a model, they want to query a data store. They expect to be able to do that. And that really launches this past, you know, the shuffling papers, no pun intended. Another challenge is incomplete systems as digital content. We at BIMobject, one of our challenges, and I really wish I could find hard data on this, but Steve's best estimation is that we only have about 20% of all building products even digitalized on any platform, and not just BIMobject. I'm talking about the global built environment. You know, all manufacturers. I think there's, while it may be available somewhere, maybe it's in their manufacturing operation or something, it's still not available to the built environment, meaning where it's assembled. And we still have a long way to go there. Another challenge, there's a huge amount of profitability from the current chaos. And some people may not like hearing that, but that's the reality. The ambiguity, arguing on design intent, there's a lot of profitability being made there. That's really not value added, and it's really hurting us, not only in dollars, but time. One other thing I want you to consider is file-based thinking and processes. Threading is what it's going to go to. With that common data environment, I remember, and a lot of times we get this from designers that we don't need all those properties in there. I just want to see, you know, what I just got to transmit design intent. It weighs down my model. It makes my model too big. It makes my file too big. That is not going to, in some cases, that's already not a factor, because we're not throwing files over the fence, so to speak, to the next guy, or or gal, we are all accessing and embellishing a common data environment that is it may have a geometric model. It may have other data stores of other information that's all threaded together. So when I speak of threading, it's kind of like the internet now. We don't store every document. We go out and find it, and it's not much different than that. So what's happening to current processes? Well, like it or not, that's what's happening. We're seeing this more and more. In many cases, it's starting to go underground to somewhat from what we used to see before, where a building owner would commission a design firm, and they worked in a silo and created that design and then handed it off to the contractor that made the largest mistake. It's not going to continue that way. It may. We do still have blacksmiths. I tell people that all the time, but it is an art. And it's really cool, and it's art, and I love iron, but there's no way somebody can be in business making nails today or making car parts in a blacksmith shop. So how do we remain relevant? We digitalize. That's really the name of the game. Apply 21st century principles. One of them I would suggest, and I plan to have a future topic on this, is Industry 4.0. Look at that, understand it, because you're going to be impacted by it. You already are being impacted by it to some degree, but it actually goes a whole level beyond our current utilization of digital content and has decision making, not just through artificial intelligence, but all kinds of predictive sequencing and programming. So that's a big change that's going to really impact this built environment. So I pulled one slide out. If you want more information on that, from what I understand, Henrik von Schiele is kind of, he's credited with somewhat bringing this to the forefront. There are other books out there that are good. I really encourage you to look at it. But as you can see in his graphic here, bioinformatics, these are things that are actually impacting the built environment, and nanotechnology, neurotechnology, advanced materials. These are all factors that are going to be changing the way we do business in a real big way.
Hey Steve, before you're wrapping up. So this is great. Had a couple of questions. So one thing that I wanted to touch upon.
I'll leave this up for a minute. Go ahead.
One thing that I wanted to touch upon, Neil Barman made a comment that another impediment is proprietary file formats such as Revit, and he suggested OpenBIM and IFC are better solutions, and which is why we have at BIMobject, and if you stay tuned for future webinars, first of the month and last of the month, we do a webinar for what our product is called BIMscript. So BIMscript is actually a scripting language based on Rhino, and it allows building product manufacturers to create BIM content, but it doesn't really make open file formats, but it will generate up to 9 different file formats, so the one product will be consistent along 9 different platforms. And of those file formats, we're looking at Revit and ArchiCAD, AutoCAD. IFC is another one. We do content for virtualization as well, so AR and VR, and digital printing. So if you're interested in that kind of technology, we do have a webinar next week on Wednesday on BIMscript accreditation, and then at the last Wednesday of each month we have a webinar hosted by myself on various concepts, techniques, or topics covered for BIMscript.
Yeah, but absolutely. Go ahead, Lawrence.
Oh, I was going to say, so that is that. But another question for you, Steve, is Mike Wagner.
I want to answer back to his first question. So there is no silver bullet. I think we're still, the world is still kind of figuring that out. From my understanding, when the internet was first available, we had numerous browsers, and only certain browsers could browse certain sites. And unless you had 5 different browsers, there was a lot of sites you couldn't even go to. We've seen that normalize. It doesn't matter what browser you have now. what flavor you can access that data. To say that's exactly what's going to happen, I don't know, but I believe that through these common data environments that are existing, and right now they might be one-off in large design firms, I think we're going to see some, and the standards help, but they're not the silver bullet. I mean, the only real data standard we have is IFC. It's an ISO standard, and it's, while it's robust, it's meant to be an information exchange and to allow different people to see different disciplines to access different parts of it. I personally don't know that that's the end all either. I think it's yet to be seen, but it's not going to be static. It's going to continue to evolve. So you had another piece of input from someone, I hope.
Yeah, we had a comment or a question from Mike Wagner. He was wondering if you knew what the leading AR technology is right now.
When we say leading AR, I'll go to what I know, and that is for a while we've been using and playing with, it was kind of a novelty, but it was game engines. And honestly, the gaming industry's had this figured out for a long time. They can put incredibly detailed facilities that you can experience and be immersed in a gaming environment. So I do know that we have, there are Unreal, which is Epic Games. They're one. Another one that is heavily involved in the AEC space now is Unity. Unity is looking to bring their products to the gaming industry, or excuse me, to the building industry, because they see it. And we're also going to see a lot of gamification of the design process, I think, happening again with this transition of the decision makers in this industry never having lived without the internet and that kind of accessibility and that intuitive sort of interaction interface. Did that, you think, answer the question?
I think to the best of your ability.
Yeah. Don't have all the answers, guys. I really look forward to, I love to be challenged by this, because actually a lot of these I'll go through them and go do some research. So hopefully we can have some further topics on this as we move forward.
Awesome. It looks like that seems to be it for the questions right now.
All right. Well, for our wrap up, we've already had some discussion items. If you want to make sure and receive invites for all BIMobject presentations, both by the BIMscript team and myself, Holzer Time, register on BIMobject.com. It's free. It'll also allow you to download any content out there for free. You can follow us on LinkedIn for more invites. We'll be posting all the invites out there on the BIMobject page on LinkedIn. For the BIMscript ones, they're on the BIMscript page on LinkedIn. So as Lawrence already, yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt. There was one more question that just came in. It's Milton, or Ron Milton was asking if you knew what the best workflow for a multi-level building, like big files. Is there like a suggested workflow that they should adopt or that they should look into or anything like that, or anything you can suggest?
Well, I can only share with you what I've seen, in my engagements with other, large VDC firms and various conferences I've gone to. And actually, the one was USC this past Friday. When you're talking about building these stadiums that are actually not only an incredible facility but a work of art, a lot of times it's a common data environment. So they might have been using a whole host of different platforms, and so Revit, ArchiCAD, even Tekla, for the structural pieces. If I recall, the curtain wall manufacturer had a specialized system, but they created it and in their own proprietary software. But then it gets embellished that the design, their proprietary IP, if you will, about how they design the curtain wall system is within their own software, but then the end result is uploaded to this common data environment, this model. So I think we're still seeing different firms use different ones. Again, I don't think there's a silver bullet. We're still doing a lot of import and export. It's evolving, but it's evolving very quickly. So I think something will settle out, or a couple, in the U.S. Alone. I had this in another slide. In 1938, I believe it was, there were over 480 automobile manufacturers By 1960, there were like 7. And that became about because of some of the way they standardized and even created supply chains. And I think we're going to see the same thing happen in this built environment. There's a great article on LinkedIn that John McManus wrote or shared last week about a house that went up factored out of Japan. And I commented on it, and it came over basically as an IKEA house, but and it went together with major precision. But these are the things that are starting to break down. And a lot of people said, "Oh, well, isn't that like the Sears house, Steve, that you could buy? You know, that came in on a rail car in the 30s or whatever?" And I said, "Absolutely." But the difference was there's a paragraph in that article, if you go out and look at it, that really speaks exactly to the digitalization, how they use digital content to optimize every single. They're not using just the 2x4 stud precut stud walls. They're using systems for this that are not systems that we've been using in the field, because largely a lot of what we do in the way we build facilities, whether it's a house or a 38-story building, have been designed and engineered to use systems to put on-site labor together, you know, needing on-site labor. And that's being rethought in a lot of these places with these off-site fabrication. So with that said, next Wednesday, Lawrence will have his webinar Wednesday on the standing one, learning how to become an accredited BIMscript content developer. Again, it's free. And then I didn't put our topic down. I wanted to see what the feedback was today out of this inaugural launch of Holzer Time. And tell me, what are you looking for? What's and any of you that would care to maybe be on with me, I'm happy to arrange where we can have somewhat of a discussion in one of these too. I do have some of those coming up with some folks I've met. I have a queue right now. So, you know, we're meant for this to be a living and learning thing for all of us. At the end, after we close the webinar, a survey is going to be available, and it's only a couple questions. So please give us some feedback on it. And thanks for helping us deliver more of what you need, because that's what we're here to do, and make a difference in this amazing industry that we all get to be part of and actors in every day. So, Lawrence, if there's nothing else, I think we're ready to sign off. And the recording will be going out to everyone who attended, as well as anyone who registered and did not attend. And feel free to share that link around if you think there's somebody that would benefit from seeing it.
I think we are good for questions, and I'd just like to thank everyone for joining, and hope to see you on our next webinar for BIMscript accreditation, as well as every other Wednesday for Holzer Time and BIMscript, any other BIMscript webinar. So thanks for your time, everyone. And again, recordings will be sent out, or the link to the recording will be sent out 2 days after today's session. If you do not receive that email with the link, please feel free to contact Steve or myself. You can, Steve, did you add a email address?
Yeah, it's at the very beginning. You guys all remember that, don't you? It's steve.holzer, Holzer, at BIMobject.com. And if you have any complaints, it's lawrence.lamb at BIMobject.com. So make sure Lawrence gets those. But lawrence.lamb, Lam, at BIMobject.com. And I'll add that into our closeout. So thanks, everybody. For those of you in the US, we're off with fireworks. Enjoy your holiday. Take care.
Happy 4th of July, everyone. All right.
Bye-bye.